Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Philippe Citroën. I'm Director General of UNIFE, and we are the organizers of this very important webinar, which is called Technological Leadership, Global Level Playing Field and Green Transition, 2 points, the rail industry ecosystem perspective. You know that Commissioner Breton, with the Commissioner in charge of industry, has launched this EU Industry Week. So this event is part of this EU Industry Week. So we'll be very happy to say that with all the participants and the speakers who have accepted to be there, we will certainly have a very interesting debate. So now I give the floor to Chris Jackson, the well-known journalist editor-in-chief of Railway Gazette, who will manage and be the moderator. And I would like to thank again all the speakers for accepting to be there. 2 more speakers will join in a few minutes from now, but I think we can start the meeting. So, Chris, the floor is yours, and thank you again for accepting to moderate this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippe. It's a great pleasure to join you again, albeit virtually. This is a particularly exciting topic as for the EU Industry Week. If you just look through some of the bullet points in the European Union's industrial strategy, things like competitive and world leading, climate neutrality, digitalization, global level playing field, circular economy. These are all topics that UNIFE has been promoting for the European rail supply sector over many years, and I think that it's good that the rail industry has a role to play in the whole of the European industrial strategy. And the challenge, of course, is how we fit rail into the transport and mobility ecosystem, which is starting to emerge. And we have five speakers who are going to look at this from different perspectives over the course of the morning. We're going to invite each speaker to say a few words first, and then we'll open the debate up to some questions and answers. There is a Q&A chat function, a Q&A function within the Teams platform, so you can put questions in at any time, and then we'll try and come to those after each of the speakers has said their part. We're waiting for Christoph Grudler, for the MEP, who has failed to join us at the moment. So I'm going to hand the floor first to Agatha Kratz from Rhodium Group, who's an expert on EU-China relations. Now, China's rail sector has been growing very rapidly and is probably the biggest challenger to the European leadership at the moment. So, Agatha, would you like to give us your thoughts on rail in the future?
Of course. Thanks, Chris. Thanks very much. I was going to start off having had a bit of an introduction on the status of the rail industry within European industry. But let's jump right into the challenge. Let's jump right into the difficult questions. And then I think the panelists after me are going to speak about solutions and are going to speak about what European industry can do. So let me set the floor and let's set the stage a little bit. The European rail industry is really a model of European industrial tech, competency, success, but it is also under serious long-term competitive challenges, which is what I've been asked to speak about today. In many ways, it's actually probably a test case for Europe's ability to respond to those new global competitive challenges emerging for certain emerging economies, especially China, and this without giving up some of its core principle. In the rail industry, in particular, in the past decade, we've seen the emergence of very strong competitors to European rail companies with ability to capture market shares, to capture contracts. And that's especially true from China, which I'm going to speak about especially and in particular today. And that's especially true from one player, which I'm going to use to illustrate my conversation here, which is CRRC, China's rolling stock giant. Over the past 5 years, CRRC has doubled its global market share from 25% of all global revenues to 50% of all global revenues, which is in and of itself a pretty big fact. Much of that happened on the Chinese market, as the Alstom-Siemens merger case showed, because the Chinese rail market has grown so big in global perspective that being the biggest player on that market just means you have the biggest market share by definition. Outside of China, CRRC has a growing market share, but it's still about a third or a fourth of Alstom or Siemens's own market shares. But that doesn't mean that the competitive challenge and the competitive pressure isn't real or that it isn't felt starkly by European rail companies. In fact, CRRC has quickly been expanding its commercial presence outside of China over the past 10 years. Its global revenues are now 10 times what they were 10 years ago. So it's grown exponentially. And before the US turned to Trump, the company had won a string of contracts from Philadelphia to Los Angeles to Boston. And in the emerging world, emerging countries, the company is gaining very, very strong market share, even with multilateral institutions and contracts. And that's going very, very fast. Don't get me wrong, the pressure that we're seeing from CRRC is for wide part warranted and should be welcome. Competition should be welcome in and of itself. CRRC has, as I said, exceptional track record equipping, servicing the biggest rail market on earth. So there's no reason why it shouldn't be a good competitor abroad. And it's also leveraging a low-cost environment in China, which makes its prices attractive. The problem, however, is that part of that success is relying on unlevel or imbalanced competitive conditions that make it harder for European companies to compete fairly and squarely in a number of markets. Those distortions are of three main kinds. The first one, and I've already mentioned that, is CRRC's and a number of Chinese rail players' monopolistic or almost monopolistic position on the Chinese market, which comes from strong market barriers to entry for foreign players in the biggest rail market on earth. This grants CRRC advantages from scale, of course, allowing it to reduce cost. It grants it advantages and opportunities to also gather very important profits, which can be reinvested in foreign markets, which makes it easier to then penetrate foreign activities, gain foreign contracts. On top of that, it's already a big competitive advantage. But on top of that, CRRC benefits from direct state support because China's strategic industry, state-owned companies, have been receiving a certain amount of state support over the past few years. CRRC, for its own part, receives as much as 450 million euros in subsidies per year, which in and of itself is a big boost. And it also benefits on top of that from low input prices, including energy, abundant financing for R&D activities and low capital costs. All of that, once again, compounds that core competitiveness and natural competitiveness in probably a little bit more unfair ways, which makes it very hard for competitors to position themselves. Third and finally, there is strong support in China for CRRC's internationalization, for CRRC's global endeavors, in the form of diplomatic support, intense diplomatic support, but also export credit and abundant and pretty low price export credit, which once again make CRRC products extremely attractive, but also unlevel the playing field for certain other players, especially European players. That unlevel playing field is a challenge and requires clear-headed responses to avoid European players getting hurt too hard or for too long, which could be a long-term harm for the industry. But fortunately, and this is what we're speaking about today, in part, not just, but in part, European firms, European officials are now fully aware of the challenge, and steps are being taken at the moment. We've seen, of course, intense company-level reorganization efforts, one that didn't work out a few years ago, but very, very recently, Alstom Bombardier joining hands together. This will need to be accompanied by intense innovation, and I'm aware that Veronique is going to speak about that in a minute, and I'm excited about this part of it. But you know, all of that will need to happen at the company level for competitiveness to be gained or maintained. At the policy level, a lot is happening as well, and Europe has really woken up to the challenge of unfair or distorted Chinese competition in a number of ways. New instruments are being discussed, including trade defense instruments, an international procurement instrument being discussed at the moment, an instrument on foreign subsidies, all of which are going to populate the toolbox, European toolbox, to respond to those distortions and make it easier for European players to compete on a level playing field. As much as possible, this should be accompanied by efforts to document Chinese distortive practices, because cases filed under those new instruments are only as good as the information you can provide. in their context. It will also require better use of existing instruments that are already at the disposal of the European Union and member states, such as the public procurement directives, to make sure that a level playing field is maintained even on the European market. And finally, we require efforts not just at the EU level, but at the member states level to make sure that they apply those principles and they defend competition, healthy competition on their market as much as possible. And of course, and lastly, this will be my last word, it involves thinking around a European industry strategy, which is what we're speaking about today, and how it can serve those cutting-edge European industries, including rail. In doing so, there are three principles that should be upheld. It should not be a copy of the Chinese model, because in China's industrial strategy, a lot of wastage goes in the process, and we shouldn't be restating or resetting in motion those kinds of practices. It should not be canceling out competition the way that the Chinese model is doing at the moment with only one player. Competition is good, and it's good for our consumers, it's good for prices, and it's good for innovation. And finally, it should support internal market buildup, because what I said about the Chinese market being so big and the ability to scale up is something we can realize on the European market, and so this should be a core component of the policy. I'll leave it here, and thank you very much for having me today.
Well, thank you, Agatha. That's just, some interesting things to think about there, particularly in terms of scale, of market access, competition, competitiveness. You talked about innovation, and I think appropriately our next speaker up, Alberto Perondo, is the current chair of the European Rail Research Advisory Council. So he's going to give us some thoughts about where innovation can help to sustain Europe's leadership in that sense, and what the priorities should be in terms of building the future. So Alberto, I think you're up next. Welcome.
Yep. Thank you very much, Chris, and very well appreciated what Agatha mentioned. I think I will certainly refer to what she said. And first of all, thanks for the European Commission for declaring 2021 as the European Rail of Year. Thank you. It is a good recognition of everything the rail industry and the rail sector entirely does. And thanks for UNIFE as well, Philippe, to organize this digital event. And thanks, Chris, as well, for moderating that for all of us. So I would like to briefly talk about the role of ERAC in this technological leadership. But before that, I would like to make a few remarks about how the rail sector will contribute for a stronger Europe, which I think is the challenge that we all have in front of us. We know that the rail sector is a very important contributor to the global industrial growth that we see in Europe because of the number of jobs, more than 1 million direct and 1.2 indirect jobs. Even though those figures are well known, I insist on reminding them because it's also a big asset that we have. And we need to recognize as well how relevant innovation is for that. Because even though rail originated in Europe, and even though it has sustained the mobility needs of all of our citizens with the best infrastructure managers and transport operators in the world, and as well, it has created a very dynamic, competitive, world leader and attractive industrial sector that we need not to forget. Now, as Agatha pointed out, we are confronted with a new environment. We are confronted with new market entrants, which are challenging the world leadership that the European rail industry supply used to have. And those come especially from Asia and especially from China. And what we currently appreciate from them, that they are offering products, certainly at very low costs. I will discuss about the attractiveness of those products later on, but certainly at the very beginning, it was a low quality product. Not anymore, unfortunately. We must understand that they are getting more and more attractive, and some customers are appreciating those, which is extremely unfortunate. So what can we do from Europe to counter that threat, that unfair threat, shall I say, because of all the good reasons that Agatha introduced and explained. And there's, to my knowledge, there's not much that can be done beyond investing in innovation. We need to understand that If we want to defend Europe, if we want to defend us, if we want to defend our friends, our relatives, but also our sons and daughters, for those who, like me, have, we must maintain the European leadership on this. And the only way for us to do that is through research and innovation. This effort is crucial. The world leadership of the European rail industry supply is largely due to those capacities. While the overall international competition constitute a cause of concern for all the European rail suppliers, we need to stay at the forefront of research and innovation. That is a key factor for our success, to ensure that we will preserve our leadership and we will remain able to compete successfully. In order to achieve this leadership, we must get a common European rail research and innovation strategy that is well supported by all the European rail stakeholders, including academia and including industry. Reducing innovation and research investment is an easy task. It takes no effort. There will almost be no resistance. But try then to sell any product that is not innovative enough, that will become obsolete very soon in this ever and fast changing environment with the digital evolution. Try to sell them and you'll notice the challenge. So yes, transitioning to our mobility needs, from our mobility needs, existing one, into a new green solution environment without innovation, from my humble standpoint, is not feasible. It's not possible. There will be no possibility to innovate if we don't allocate the proper budgets. So, what is the role of ERAC in all this? For those who are not familiar with ERAC, ERAC being the European Rail Research Advisory Council, we are a European rail technology platform. We bring together all the stakeholders in Europe, as I said before, academia, industry, infrastructure managers, operators, undertaking, everyone. And we have been able to set up, we've been responsible for the definition of the research and innovation strategy to boost the European technology leadership for the reasons I mentioned before. And by working together, all the stakeholders, and prioritizing those research needs, we will certainly support the Europe retention of our global leadership. That's the fundamental reason why ERAC is so relevant. What have we done over the past, the recent years, the past 4 years? Just for those who don't have that in mind, first, in 2017, we published our Rail Vision for 2050. In a simple word, we basically were proposing a strategy so that we would maintain railway as the backbone of the European mobility. That is a fundamental thing to take away. It was a far distant vision, some said. So back in 2019, we published our own ERAC Rail 2030 Research and Innovation Priorities. We identified which were those priorities. No surprise, you're all aware of, but I will insist once again. We thought that automation and digitalization of the railway system was fundamental. The integration of the railway into a door-to-door mobility ecosystem, that's fundamental word, the buzzword of door-to-door, how rail integrates into that. The intelligent asset lifecycle management. Of course, we were even anticipating that environmental sustainability and green freight transport. So we did that, but still back in 2020, we had to publish a new ERAC Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, the famous SRIA, which was proposing 9 key transformation projects to be launched at European level to achieve this 2050 vision. Thus, eventually, should we have more time, Chris, we might talk about those transforming projects again, but it was the fundamental asset, our contribution for the future of the innovation. In the past, ERAC has considered that Shift to Rail 2 as a joint undertaking was fundamental in delivering this vision. And its successor, the future within Horizon Europe Rail joint undertaking, will be key to deliver that SRIA and to deliver further on the 2050 vision. But we require for that, as you may understand, institutional support. We need as well dedicated funding from the European Commission, which we are currently negotiating, thanks God. Back in late 2020, we were called as well, we called for a funding of 1.5 billion for Europe's rail joint undertaking, and reiterated that any delays should be avoided in launching this rail partnership. Unfortunately, we don't have that budget. And remember what I said at the beginning, should we refrain from investing in innovation, we'll have obsolete products, we shall not be able to meet the market needs. So let us think about. And globally speaking, the rail European research and innovation is a key contributor to support the larger European policy objectives if we want to go for the Green Deal, if we want to go for additional security, safety, sustainability goals. It all depends on the innovation that we have. So, as a summary, the European Year of Rail, I believe, is an unprecedented moment to reflect about the rail's past contributions, our place in Europe's present, and our potential role in the future. And as we collectively embark in an ambitious path towards the carbon neutrality, as outlined by the European Green Deal, research and innovation will become even more important if we want to cross those sustainability milestones. It is fundamental that we invest in innovation to meet those requirements. ERAC, alongside with the
I think there is a small issue with but he finished his presentation, so it's
okay.
Okay.
Yes. Well. Thank you, Alberto. Yeah. Sorry, we've lost you there, but I think the message is loud and clear. Innovation has to be at the heart of industrial competitiveness and the future transition to greener transport. And I think that takes us very nicely. We can move on to Véronique Andriès from Alstom, who is the chair of UNIFE's Committee on Sustainability. And so she can talk about the role of rail within the green transition and how we use that green transition to strengthen the rail sector. So Véronique, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris, and thank you to UNIFE to give me the opportunity to present a couple of things on sustainability, and I would like to start saying that the Green Deal, the European Green Deal, is a chance for EU industry competitivity. The ambition of the Green Deal is to affirm Europe as the global leader in the transition to a net zero greenhouse gases emissions and resource efficient economy by reaching full climate neutrality by 2050 and by decoupling economic growth from resources use. All sectors, obviously, and industry have a part to play in this transition by massively reducing their carbon footprint. And railway, as the backbone of mobility, is committed to be a major player of transport decarbonization. And I would like to remind that some transport sector accounts for nearly a quarter of the overall greenhouse gases emission in the EU, and rails account for less than 0.5% of this emission, while carrying 70% of freight and 8% of passenger. And rails generate less pollutant emission than other motorized mode, and this mode is clearly a powerful lever for air quality improvement and also as a resource efficient mode. Now, I would like to underline how innovation is important to allow an EU leadership on green mobility. And in that respect, the latest years were successful regarding green innovation in our sector. Thanks to Shift to Rail and other member state initiatives, a lot of solutions were developed to serve decarbonization and environmental savings. Zero greenhouse gases direct emission propulsion system have progressed significantly over the last few years. In the railway domain, recent orders have been placed on fuel cell powered trains, so hydrogen trains, as well as on battery powered trains. Hydrogen trains shows that technical solution exists to displace diesel when classical electrification is too costly or not suitable. Obviously, it is the beginning of the story for hydrogen train. There is still room for improvement, and especially in terms of autonomy. And I also wish to underline that blocking point still must be removed at various levels, including regulatory and fiscal rules. And this is the condition to allow widespread deployment. With the fuel cell and battery powertrain, Europe is and shall remain at the forefront of zero direct greenhouse gases emission technology that are also more energy efficient, and it is also important to have that in mind. Shift2Rail has also allowed us to improve the energy efficiency of electrical trains using new efficient traction components such as transformer, silicon carbide components that allow to decrease the energy consumption by 20%, and it's a lot. Beyond traction system, railway systems are also resource efficient, and thanks to eco-design, circular economy, environmental footprint over their life cycle has been lowered and still need to be lowered. Again, with energy saving, low footprint and eco-label components, improving system lifetime, end-of-life management, reusing some component, improving the recyclability, increasing the recycled content, a lot of things still to do. And for your information, new rolling stock achieve at least recyclability rate above 90%. That is a lot, and recoverability is close to 100%. In terms of connectivity and digitalization now, also drastically improvement achieved. In railways, metro automation is a given for most or all new lines. But several projects are now ongoing to enable automatic train control in various other use cases, from tramway to main lines. The contribution of Shift2Rail in that respect was very important, developing the automatic train operation specification. Obviously, in terms of innovation and research and development, the rail industry welcomed the proposal to continue the works inside Europe's rail joint undertaking. And the different transforming projects will allow to accelerate the digitalization and the green transition of our sector. We, as railways, have the ambition to make European rail the champion of sustainable mobility, no more, no less. Now, regarding the level playing field and in relation to innovation, it is important to unlock the switch to zero emission innovative solutions such as hydrogen trains. Indeed, few examples of points to be addressed. First, infrastructure cost can be important, either electric or hydrogen related. And we believe that alternative fuel infrastructure directive is a good instrument to address that issue, integrating rail sector in the scope. Hydrogen vehicles are today more costly than the diesel equivalent, while switching to zero emission modes does not generate additional revenues. And last point is that we have a network effect. Certain applications like long distance rail freight require a dense network of refueling stations across the EU. Now, another topic for level playing field is between the different transport modes, and ensuring a level playing field between the different transport modes should also be addressed by internalization of external costs. Environmental health impact of transport, such as pollution, climate change, congestion, accident, have significant impact on the economy, and the costs generated are not paid by the contributing actor. That's why external costs should be internalized across all transport modes. This just applying polluter pays principle. And there are a number of ways to address that issue with Eurovignette, for instance, charging all type of road vehicles for the use of certain infrastructure, the extension of ETS, and also the possibility to establish a taxation for CO2 emitting mode. Another point is that EU international diplomacy should participate in promoting EU standards and ensuring a global playing field. Again, environment and health protection is a domain on which EU has stricter rules and practices than in other regions of the world. This is an opportunity only if a global playing field can be ensured. Requirements and criteria should be fair, with well-defined methodology and verifiable for EU and non-EU actors. And this is very important. And to finish, just a small reference to the period we are all living now, that is the COVID crisis. And the COVID crisis is also a topic for a global level playing field. The risk mitigation provision, the standard, as well as the sanitary protocol, may apply differently depending on the places and the region of the world. So this is also a topic for the global level playing field. Yeah, that's
you. Okay, thank you very much, Veronique. A lot of thoughts there to cover. I have to say, one of the challenges of being in a leadership role is every time you come up with a new idea, other people start to copy you. So you have to keep constantly innovating to keep ahead, and certainly that's going to be a challenge as we transition to a greener, more sustainable transport mode. Now, we're still waiting for Mr. Grudler, who's going to join us a bit later, but we have our fourth speaker already up and waiting. One of the key points about the European industry ecosystem is that it's large and small. We've talked a lot about the global big players, but innovation quite often comes from the smaller players, and SMEs have a critical role to play in the whole structure. So our fourth speaker is Veronica Bocci from the Ditecfa cluster of smaller companies in the Tuscany region, who is part of the cluster's initiative to bring smaller companies into the rail sector, where they can bring this kind of innovation and fresh thinking. So Veronica, would you like to give us your thoughts about where you sit in the rail ecosystem?
Thank you, Chris, for the question, and thanks again for the invitation. Yes, the clusters are indeed the actors on the ground. Okay, so we are talking about the European industrial railway ecosystem, and ours are territorial ecosystems, but very complex as the European ecosystem is. We are an innovation-driven cluster, so this means that we don't only represent the value chain that was established around the big industrial leaders, and in our region we cover both the two main segments, the rolling stock and infrastructure, command, control and signaling. So this means a very complex and very capable ecosystem of companies. Of course, most of them, the majority of them is SMEs. And this makes the challenges, the 3 key challenges we are talking about today, even more complex because you need to translate all these challenges into an understandable language, in the sense that all companies are very pragmatic. They operate on the markets, they know the markets, and they know how to be sustainable. But when change comes, like in this very moment where we are talking about resilience after pandemic, we are talking about twin transition with the new industrial strategy of the EU, this means change and this means new investments. And as Alberto Parrondo has correctly emphasized earlier, proper budgets are necessary when change comes. And proper budgets in SMEs are not always so often to be prepared and to be made available. So this pragmatism in making choices is somehow a challenge for the clusters, because we need to push the value chain towards this kind of change, but we also need to help them select the own challenge, where to invest, what are own priorities for each SME along the value chain. So when we are now, for instance, the European Commission has an expert group not only on the rail supply industry, but also on clusters. And the recent recommendations that the European Commission expert group has adopted consider clusters as agents of change to foster green transition, to accelerate the digital transition, and of course to tackle the resilience. But you see, accelerate the digital transition, for instance, means that the digital transition has started, and we know we have called it Industry 4.0. It's it's a major, it's a flagship policy in all our countries, but most of the companies along the value chains have said, it's none of my business. I'm a carpentry. I don't need necessarily to have robotics inside my company. I don't necessarily need to use cloud computing and IoT and the like. But so our role is to make each of them understand that it's their time and they have to commit into these transitions. And this, of course, brings together the need to identify the proper funding at a territorial level. So it's about lobbying with regional authorities, national authorities, and the like, and also to help, once again, to identify priorities. This also happens when we talk about research and innovation. So for instance, the ERAC innovation roadmaps for us are key, of course, like for all Europe, but this helps us show the companies the innovation that matters, because if you have to invest, it is better that you concentrate, you focus on what ERAC is describing, the railway transportation, the Europe's rail of the future will look like ERAC said. So you have to offer innovation that matches this kind of challenges and this kind of roadmaps. So you have to select where to invest. And in this overall set of challenges, I also would like to include the challenge of internationalization, because of course, not only the big leaders face the third market, but also SMEs are even more trying to find their role at a global level. And once again, the European Commission is using clusters to do this. And we have just been awarded a new European project to identify, to develop innovative approaches to promote SMEs participation in public procurements in third countries. And this because the EU wants to also the SMEs to capitalize on the free trade agreements that it has signed with other countries and other geographical areas in the world. but the fact of having free trade agreements, including SMEs chapters, is not, the end of the story. There are even more challenges that have to be identified and solved, and clusters like ours are there to make this job.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes, I can see the challenge of an SME competing on a global level, and yes, having the competence of participating at the bigger scale. Just to remind viewers out there that you can start putting your questions into the panel. The Q&A feed is open. That's why I see one or two starting to come in. We're still waiting for Mr. Grudler, so maybe while we're waiting, we'll start just put a few questions to some of the panelists. I'm going to go back to Agatha to start with. You gave us a very clear picture of the Chinese competitive threat, and do you think the EU has got the right tools to respond?
Hi, Chris. That's a very good question. I think it's two things. The first one is, fortunately, I think the EU is responding at the moment, which is something that took a little bit of time to put together a strategy on China and competition from China and other markets, of course. And that's the first step. But we, as an economist, we had been waiting for that for a little while, and it's already an excellent sign to see it moving forward. On the tools, I think we are in the process, and we are seeing the development of new tools that are actually very well tailored to address some of the comments I've made earlier and some of the concerns around subsidies, around market access, around unfair and reciprocal procurement markets, which was mentioned just now, actually. And so the tools are the right ones. The problem will be implementing them often enough and efficiently enough. That will involve, and as I mentioned, gathering the right information and making sure that industry in particular participates in putting together the building blocks for filing cases and filing good cases, so that those tools are actually efficient. And then it will require using them enough and efficiently enough, not just at the EU level, but at the member state level, that those are actually efficient. A lot of the public procurement still happens at the member state level. And so it's one thing that the EU proposes new rules or suggests new rules, but those need to be applied at the member state level, and that will be one of the challenges. So the toolbox is there, but it needs to be used, and it needs to be used efficiently. Right,
thank you. That's a very, very good point to emphasize. Europe may propose, but the member states have to implement, and that's that I think has been a challenge for the industry in many respects, and not just in the industrial strategy. I see Christoph Grudler has now joined us. Is he ready to? Mr. Grudler is MEP from the European Parliament's Industry Committee, Shadow Rapporteur on the new industrial strategy for Europe, and delighted that he's finally able to join us and can perhaps talk about the rail's role in the European industry ecosystem for the future. Mr. Grudler, welcome, all yours.
Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you for the invitation. You can hear me or no?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm so sorry. It's better like that? Okay, thank you very much. It's very useful for me because I can hear all of you with this thing. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with you today. As you may know, I'm passionate with everything that moves. Planes, space rockets, and of course trains. That's the reason why is that because I'm coming from a city which name is Belfort in France, historical industrial site in railway, especially with Alstom. That being said, let me start with a broader perspective with European industrial strategy. historically, railway is one of the most important industries. If you think about the 19th and 20th centuries, trains were key in the industrial revolution. Today, in 2021, horses are not here anymore, but trains are more important than ever to move goods or people. As you know, last year the Commission presented a new industrial strategy. It was in March. In this strategy, the rail industry was well mentioned and was clearly identified by Commissioner Breton in one of the key ecosystems. Last November, we adopted a report in the European Parliament on this strategy, where we called for more investments in trains and rail networks. I would like to focus a bit on this report and highlight three important points for the sector. The first one is the importance of innovation. Second one is the international competition, as you already talked before. And finally, the digital and green transition. First, our report talk about the necessary innovation. Without more innovation, the European industry will not survive. From Horizon Europe to Invest EU, I believe that the EU is making progress to devote more money to R&D. Moreover, I'm particularly happy with the growing use of European alliances and IPCIs. They are great tools to invest in strategic sectors and catch up in certain fields in which Europe is lagging behind. For example, the Alliance for Clean Hydrogen is very promising for all means of transport, but especially for the railway sector. On this technology, I think that the EU should much more and has a possibility to be a leader. Secondly, the question is on international competition is also crucial. More precisely, I would say that fair competition is important. As Commissioner Breton says, the time of a naive Europe is over. And this could especially be the case in the industrial sector and in the railway sector. This is why it is important for the EU to be proactive and to systematically defend Europe unfair dumping. Here, of course, I am thinking of the competition coming from China, not especially the USA. Also, the issue of international competition goes together with the European autonomic strategy in an open market, as we used to say in the European institutions. The COVID-19 reminds us how dependent we were on some strategic products and technologies. And this is also true for railway technologies. They have, for example, more and more electronics made with rare earth elements that are coming from third countries. This is why the EU needs to carefully analyze its value chains and to diversify our supplies. Thirdly, in our report, we recalled the importance of the transition to a digital and carbon neutral economy. Of course, railway is already one of the greenest ways of transport, but we can do even better, especially in the production of rolling stock. The railway industry should speed up on the circularity of the economy and the necessary transition towards clean steel. Moreover, one of the key to competitiveness is the digitalization of the industry. From signaling components to the digital optimization of energy consumption And finally, to the autonomous machines, the train sector needs to do its digital revolution. Now, to finish, I will speak briefly of the upcoming update of the industrial strategy, which will be present on the 27th of April. Three main points, in my opinion, should be addressed. First, a real consideration of the enormous challenges that the recovery will bring for the industries. Having a green and digital transition just after an economic crisis is not always easy. This is why the Commission should adapt the industrial strategy with the recovery plan in mind. Secondly, we need an even more ambitious approach to strategic autonomy. When the first version of the industrial strategy was presented last year, it was at the beginning of the pandemic. Many things have changed since then, and we need to be even more conscious of our weaknesses and improve our strategic autonomy. And finally, the revised industrial strategy should reaffirm the need to revise the European competition rules. This is important to let the European companies grow and to allow them to face the international competition. To conclude quickly, let me say that trains are a wonderful means of transportation, and I hope we can maintain Europe's leadership in this technology. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gridler. Yes, there's some interesting points there, and the questions are starting to come in, but I'm going to throw one at you first, if I may. There's been some talk, and I believe you've mentioned in the past, the idea of a Buy European Act, like the American, the Buy America Act. That would kind of protect Europe's domestic industry against external competition, but might it not also hinder competitiveness the other way? I mean, is the route to a global level playing field to open up everywhere rather than shut down region by region?
I agree with you. When I spoke about a Buy European Act, it's like an electroshock. We can say in French. It's when America say Buy American Act, the answer, if you want to have a real level playing field, is to say, okay, you make Buy American Act, we make Buy European Act. And of course, we will stop and we will discuss together in order to find the best way. And that's what we are. That's what I do with it. Of course, I totally believe in the growth of our economy with a global market. It's not to protect ourselves only and to just to make business only in Europe. I think it will be a great mistake. That's the reason why when I say Buy European Act, it's a strong commitment, and after we discuss and we find the best way. The best way for me is strategic autonomy with fair competition, level playing field, to be careful about subsidies coming from the states for unfair competition. Let's be attentive about it, and I think we do not need a Buy European Act.
No, but the threat is a useful tool to encourage discussion, and I understand that's a very fair point. We've had a question on the feed, actually, something that you mentioned that I might throw this to Veronique as well, about the question of clean steel and clean aluminium. Are there any specific initiatives about cleaning up the rail sector's use of raw materials?
Of course, there are some alliances who are very interesting for your sector. And for steel, of course, you know that it's the idea with the Green Deal is not to stop producing steel in Europe in 2050. The idea is to say how we can produce steel in Europe in 2050 without CO2 emissions. And the answer is now to use hydrogen. because we can make steel with hydrogen. We are testing it now in Sweden, and other countries are involved in this process. I think it will be a very interesting way.
Mm-hmm. Veronique Andres, you want to come in on that in terms of the greener side of manufacturing?
Yeah. I just wish to complement the answer, saying that steel is a raw material that is already containing a lot of recycled content, and we are structuring the different sources so that we can include more and more recycled content. And obviously reducing the carbon footprint of raw material is easier to do reusing something that is already manufactured. So that's why we are pushing a lot on that within railways sector.
Yeah. Is there a risk that Europe innovating in that sense actually makes itself less competitive with countries that don't bother, and that's something that has to be addressed in the procurement rules?
Oh, if the question is for me, we have not a tax but a carbon border mechanism, which we have voted yesterday in the European Parliament in an initiative report. It's not legislative first. The idea is to have legislative next year, and the idea is to say if somebody comes to Europe with bad steel, we can say, without with a very important food CO2 carbon food. Sorry, it will be tax. We don't call it tax. It's a mechanism, but it is in order to have a fair competition. It's impossible to stop our industry because the standards in the other part of the world are not the same. Then we will have a balance tool, which is this mechanism, and maybe the United States will be with us. We have a negotiation with them in order to have a mechanism for America and Europe. I think it will be a very good way because if Asia, Africa, maybe more America, Brazil, for example, want to continue to make business with us, they have to make important choice in the way they are producing steel. But now, of course, it's experimental, and the clean steel it's now experimental. In the future, it will be more important.
Okay, thank you. Agatha, you're our Chinese expert. Do you think the Chinese will react to that and look to clean up their act as well? Is that part of their diplomatic approach?
It is part of their diplomatic approach. It's part of their domestic approach. They've outlined some of their objectives for climate, some of their objectives for green technologies and green production at the 5-year plan, which was just released last week. And so greening the industry, greening especially huge industries for China, and that includes steel and aluminum, will be important. The problem is the pace of progress and how fast that can be done. And in the meantime, how much difference is there between what we do at home in Europe, which will go faster, most likely, because steel and aluminum are such big employers and such big growth contributors in China, that the change will necessarily be very, very slow. So how to handle that period between the two is going to be key. And this is why the discussions on the CBAM will be crucial, I think.
Okay, thank you. Can I throw the questions? Can I ask Alberto Parrondo? Come in. You were talking about the need for researchers' strategic research agenda. We have Europe's Rail JU coming up on the ropes on the cards fairly soon. The importance of keeping technological leadership. What are your expectations for getting that JU up and running, and how quickly is it going to start working?
The sooner the better, shall I say? Huh?
Right.
Definitely. Cannot afford to stop innovation. That's why we set our own strategic research and innovation agenda. This has been partly taken, and we are currently under discussion, the transforming projects. This has been renamed as use cases, but there's quite a good match in between what we propose and what we are currently delivering. I think really we need to do the most we can to accelerate the setup of the new joint undertaking, the Europe Rails joint undertaking, because it is fundamental for us. It's the only way to continue the rail transformation, the rail sector transformation that we have undertaken. First, with the shift to rail momentum. I think now we are gathering around this new initiative the largest infrastructure managers. Most of the European ones will be represented in this new joint undertaking. This is going to facilitate one of our historical claims, which is to go to higher TRLs, to higher research initiatives, closer to the deployment, and therefore addressing all the pre-deployment concerns of research and innovation that we've always been working for. And this will obviously accelerate as well the market uptake of our solutions. So in order to get there, we really need to start ideally end of this year, short next year, the sooner the better. And let me take benefit of the presence of the member of the parliament, Mr. Grudler. Thank you very much. Once again, as you may understand, ERAC will be claiming for more budget for rail, more budget as well for ERAC. If we want to have a strategy, it is not for free. ERAC so far has no budget, so it's something that is worth thinking about, just like we are doing with the system pillar. And if we really believe that we want to facilitate the adoption of the rail as the backbone of the European mobility, now is the time we need to invest. The sooner the better, Chris.
The better. Yeah. Yes, you mentioned in there the question of market uptake, and I know that was one of the things that was talked about all through Shift to Rail. Now, Shift to Rail's been working away for the last 6 or 7 years and come on a lot of projects. How do you actually encourage the rail sector to take up those initiatives and start and accelerate the pace of deployment?
Bob, I think we have a number of things to do. Certainly, I don't know if you're familiar with the current initiative of the SRIA. Within the SRIA, we have identified 2 pillars. One which we call the system pillar, targeting to defining the architecture of the future rail system, and the other one, the innovation pillar. So one of the first things that we need to secure, Chris, is to be sure that the system pillar, which will define this architecture, does support the migration plans and does accelerate the investments on a more harmonized European solution. This is fundamental. And we need to secure as well, there will be a clear commitment of all the IMs, of all the operators, that whatever is the outcome of this innovation, should it be successful, it will be budgeted and there will be a commitment to use it. Because it is a shared innovation effort, the European Commission, the European Parliament, we are joining and co-funding this initiative. So we want to be sure that should it be successful, it will be enforced. And therefore, funds like the Connecting Europe facility or any other that ones should be bound to use successful outcomes of the new Europe Rail joint undertaking. I think this is the key.
Does that make sense, Mr. Grudler?
It makes totally sense. I totally believe in joint undertaking, and as I'm involved in Horizon Europe program in my commission, in my committee, sorry, because I'm member vice coordinator of the ITRE committee, Industry, Research and Energy. You look very carefully of this kind of partenariat. Shift to Rail is a very good one. As Clean Sky is also another one, and maybe I can continue to say that it's also important for the rail sector to have good satellites for regulation, for signalization, for the future, for the move in all Europe. I am a reporter in my committee for the space program, and we have new satellites with EGNOS, Copernicus, and Galileo, which will be very useful for trains in Europe in the future.
I think there's a lot of crossover between the different industrial ecosystems, and one of the challenges has always been, you know, how can you take technologies from one sector and deploy them in another? And rail's actually been quite good. We talk a lot about sort of the digital transition of rail. Rail has been digitalizing for 30 or 40 years now. We have an awful lot of digital systems already in. The big challenge, I think, is joining them all together. So making sure that we have an integrated.
And if I could add something, satellite positioning is part of Shift to Rail 1 and will be part of the next Europe Rail. It's important to have this issue inside the program.
Absolutely, some interesting work. I was actually just about to come to Veronica Bocci, because I know a lot of the satellite work is being done in Italy anyway, but from looking at it from the SME perspective, what do you see as the big challenges, particularly as we're coming out of COVID and the whole recovery plan? What do your members see as the challenges for playing in this changing market?
Okay, changing markets is the key word here. The good part of the story with the first part of resilience and recovery is that our sector, the investments in our sector have not been stopped. So apart from a certain period of actual lockdown, the companies have continued to work. So we could manage quite well all the situation. But the real challenge here is changing markets, and so it is once again how fast you can react. You are able to react, okay? Because we work on a level of capacity building, okay, of empowering, of saying that you need to do this and you need to do this now. As always, there have been innovators doing things far before then it was necessary. Now to have this massive change, I think that we need that the final market clearly states the request for green products, for digital products. Only this way, if the market is clear on this, the companies will be able and ready to invest and to do what's necessary through innovation processes, to provide and to offer to the market what it is necessary. But at the same time, this is an issue of the final market. And in our sector, the final market is, in most of the cases, a public market. So it is a matter of public procurements. The green public procurements become even more necessary to show the line, okay, to say this is the new market, and therefore all the value chain, I think, will be ready to react. This in terms of strategies, of course. Then we will need concrete tools to make this change possible. And when I say concrete tools, I say in first issue, funding, okay? And funding does mean necessarily grants for free, okay? If we do innovation, it can be grants, but it can be investment for funding. And in this sense, if I may say, what the EU once again did well and did fast was, for instance, to relax the state aid framework just after the pandemic started. And for SMEs, having this tool was key in principle, because very concretely, the de minimis rule became multiplied per 4, okay? This in principle. But on the ground, once again, what we saw is that the public authorities offering grants didn't use that framework, relaxed the framework, to issue the grants. So the grants didn't go under that framework. So the de minimis remained unused. And the same for the financial institutions. The European investment banks offered a lot of tools, but the banks on the ground didn't offer those tools, rather offered their own tools with completely different conditions. So this gap in Europe, to me, doesn't, is not, yes, it cannot happen, okay? It must not happen. And we need all to fix this. Otherwise, the policy is good, but the implementation is not good as well.
Yeah, so the classic disconnect between policy and action. Is there anything you can do about that at the Parliament level, Mr. Grudler?
I try to, because I totally agree with what the coordinator said before. It's very difficult. We have a very important recovery plan with a lot of ecosystems, with a lot of sectors where we want to help. It's very good, but it needs a lot of time to arrive. And there is a difference between member states. It's, for example, in France, for example, at the end of 2020, they have a national plan. They explain, okay, so much money on a part of Europe, and they begin to spend the money because France have money, and the European money will arrive in July this year. Okay, then a big country with good GDP can first give money and wait till Europe gives it back to him. And now, if you have your country have no money, we have to wait till April, because you have national, in order to know exactly how it works. You have national plan. It arrives to the Commission, and the commissions say, okay, we agree with this, with it, not with this, etc. There is a discussion, and it will be finished in April. And the money will arrive in July, 1 year and a half after the beginning of the crisis. It's a very long time, and some member states can first make the recovery, and other states have no money to make it. It's a difficulty, and we try to help in order that we have a level playing field inside Europe with all countries and sector.
Yes, it's as inside as much as outside. Thank you, Veronique Andries. I heard you. I saw you reacting to some of those comments. Do you want to pick up on that, any of those points in terms of the relationship between the Commission and particularly on the Green Deal side of things?
Yes. Yes, indeed. Maybe I would like to reinforce the fact that the Green Deal will bring a lot of things for our sector. Yeah, on top of climate law and circular economy action plan that will enhance the European leadership on green transition. We welcome obviously the sustainable and smart mobility strategy presented by the Commission in December 2020 with ambitious target for high-speed rail and freight. Taxonomy that establish the criteria and metrics to qualify economic activities as environmental sustainable activities can have positive impact if EU funding and investment targets taxonomic compliant project supporting green and sustainable project. Maybe also I would like to highlight that the revision of energy taxation directive could have also a positive impact. Transport is at the heart of the revision of the directive, being the sector most targeted. I would like to point out two points. The first is that the currently existing tax exemption and reduction are de facto fossil fuel subsidies, which notably aviation and maritime. This creates a lack of balance and level playing field between the different modes. The energy taxation directive does and will affect the price of electricity, and any price measure imposed on electricity also affects rail transport, and this is key. And I have already mentioned the alternative fuel directive that is very important on infra investment, and I would like maybe to highlight that including rail sector in that directive is important, having in mind that we have still more than 70,000 kilometers of non-TEN lines that are not electrified. So including rail transport in that directive will allow to support electrification or transition to zero greenhouse gases emissions train.
Indeed, a lot of work to be done in terms of zero emission trains in that score. There are various questions I've got. I mean, one particularly about the challenge as Veronica raised, talking about sort of encouraging the take up of innovations. You can't write a regulation to require a technology that hasn't been invented. So there's always that catch-22 between you can't specify something until you know it's available, but you then have to do the research to make it available before you can specify it. And I think that's one of the classic drivers for research. But the question on the feed that I think we ought to take up while we still have a little bit of time left. We talked about strengthening the European market, making Europe's home market more competitive to the benefit of the way the Chinese have with their home markets. But what about competition in third countries where the Chinese have a lot of sort of diplomatic advantages? They benefit from, as Agatha said, from low-cost financing. How do you convince third-party countries to buy European in the face of low prices? Anybody want to comment on that?
I'm happy to give it a go, and then I'd love to see reactions. But this is exactly what you mentioned. The European toolbox is the easier step because we have the power of changing things at home. But what happens abroad is much harder. And as I said, a lot of the competition that happens in third market is a competition that happens on price. And on price, I mentioned the advantages and some of the unfair advantages that Chinese players benefit from, which are subsidies, which are scale, are not going to be necessarily available to European ones. We can unify the internal market and increase scales. We can try and push for more market access in China, but that's extremely hard. So what remains beyond price? There are two things, competing on product, and here Alberto's discussion I thought was very interesting. You have to compete on quality, you have to compete on innovation and fitting your products to the local markets. It seems obvious, but this is something we're better at than most Chinese competitors are. We need to emphasize life cycle costs because a lot of the Chinese products are priced very low, but they don't have necessarily the maintenance services and the ecosystem around it that we can provide. But this is something to advertise strongly because it isn't obvious to all necessarily all procurement authorities in third markets. And finally, competing on funding, and this is maybe the hardest part because it depends on a willingness for Europe first to limit funding for companies and for projects where subsidies are obvious. And this is something that's happening a lot. We're seeing Chinese companies get a bigger and bigger market share of African Development Bank, Asia Development Bank contracts. And this is very stark, even the last 2 years. and then just making available more funding for development assistance for green recovery projects. We have countries that are struggling to get out of the COVID crisis in the whole emerging world third market, who could put together green recovery packages that would help with climate targets. But European money needs to be clear enough that this needs to go to highly standardized, very high quality green products, which we're in Europe probably the best at producing. So I think those two parts are probably the most important.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, I've heard tales of Chinese locos in Africa breaking within 18 months or a couple of years. Alberto, I think you wanted to comment on this topic.
Sure, with an outstanding introduction from Agata. Thank you very much. For obvious reasons, I'm not going to comment much on the funding pillar that she mentioned, but let me go through the first two ones because it's part of what we have proposed from ERAC. Regarding the attractiveness of products and competitiveness is not just about being the cheapest, it is about providing, as she rightly pointed out, a good product and a good value for money. And so I will come back to the second one. And the first one, we have clearly identified two topics that we believe are fundamental for our own internal intra-European border infrastructure managers, but elsewhere in the world. The first one is autonomy. Anything related to autonomy, would it be autonomous train, automated type of trains, and even remotely piloted trains. So we have quite a technology there. Let's, though, not be naive. Chinese are also investing in that. Therefore, we need to be.
Oh dear. I fear Alberto has frozen again. Mr. Grindler, did you have a comment from the Parliament's perspective?
I think all as already said about the topic, the question you have. We need innovation, more innovation, and we will be better than China in the third countries. Of course, we have a problem of price. That's a reality. But if we have quality, if you have services, I think it will be the best way. Now I have a relation with Ukraine, for example, where they want to invest for new trains, and I try to explain to them that it's more important to have a stronger material with a lot of power than to buy a cheaper locomotive, but it's not the same use, and you have to invest for the future and for a long time. And of course, maybe we can have European subsidies to the third countries to help them. It's what we call l'aide au développement is. In some member states, it's what already happens, but I think at the European level we can do it also and say, okay, this is money for your development. You know, we have a lot of good things in Europe. You can buy it with a part of our money. I think it's the way China is using, and I think it's the way we have to use.
Okay, Alberto is back. You want to finish your comments?
I'm so sorry about the lousy connectivity, but my point was the second one about traffic management. We want to manage the entire network. This is a matter of capacity. This is one of the key concerns that we have. And then finally, regarding the second one that Agata pointed out about the life cycle, what we are proposing is the railway digital twins. And we will include in that simulation tool, virtualization tools, all those. The adoption, first the development and the innovation approach will reduce the overall running cost of our rail entire infrastructure. So as I said, the key takeaways for us from a product perspective, autonomy and traffic management, and from a pure cost reduction initiative, the digital twins. We have 6 more transforming projects, but that at least those 3 should demonstrate our capacity and would give us additional competitiveness. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Veronique, from your side.
Yeah, very shortly, I would like to add something on the public procurement process, and would like to insist that when assessing public tenders, it is important to look at a best price quality ratio rather than at best price only. And this obviously may provide extra benefits on maximization of the value of procurement, reduce obsolescence, increased and fair competition. And in that respect, the so-called most economically advantageous tender principle should be applied when assessing public tenders. And that's clear that proposing innovation, green solution, it's very good and is a sine qua non condition to be competitive. But the starting point is also to consider that best practices and that added value in the procurement process.
Absolutely, yeah. That whole life cycle cost and the value of the procurement. It's a lesson that I think we're gradually starting to learn in Europe, but we also need to make that case in third markets as well, and that's absolutely critical to competitiveness, to understand the total value of the whole investment. Looking at my clock, I think we're running out of time, so I think it's probably about time for me to hand back to Philippe Citroën to round up. Philippe, over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for having accepted to moderate this meeting. But I would like to thank all the speakers for providing us with their views and expertise today. It appears clearly from the debate that we need a EU mobility strategy. We were very happy to have this communication presented by Madame Valéan in December, but we also need a revised EU industrial strategy that helps the European rail supply industry retain its global leadership and its 400,000 jobs in Europe. And I know that Mr. Grubler, and I would like to thank him again for being here, told us that there will be a revised proposal by Mr. Breton on the 27th of April, so it's important to be ready for this important document. But this is key for the whole European rail industry ecosystem, including all its SMEs. And I would like to thank the DICTAFER representative for Veronica for all the words and what she said concerning the role of SMEs in Europe. We are, of course, grateful to the Commission for including the rail industry as part of the transport and mobility ecosystem among the 14 priority industrial ecosystem announced by Commissioner Thierry Breton, but we would like to know a bit more how those ecosystems will work. I would like to thank the Commission and DG GROW for having accepted to extend the mandate of this EC expert group on the competitiveness of European rail supply industry for the years 2021, 2022, and this committee has been created thanks to the good work made by the ITRE committee 4 years ago. So this expert group is really very important for us. So on our side, I would like to say that we reaffirm our commitment to lead the twin transition toward climate neutrality and digital leadership. And I will not come back on Shift to Rail 2, which will be called Europe's Rail, but would like to thank all the institutions who have been proposing this instrument, and we'll be very happy to be very active in Europe's Rail. And I just want to remind to all the participants that these public-private partnerships are co-financed by the industry, and the industry that shows for this partnership a very big interest as a co-financer of this joint undertaking. But we also need an EU industrial strategy that allows us to use EU public procurement rules as a lever to secure industrial jobs in Europe and to restore a level playing field between European and non-European rail suppliers. And I would like to thank Agatha for very good explanations concerning the threats that we have on the Chinese side, but not only on Chinese, on other countries. Indeed, the current crisis, this COVID-19 pandemic, could result in further protectionist measures and barriers for European companies abroad, but also in more aggressive strategy to penetrate the EU market by foreign state-owned companies. Therefore, while the EU struggles to further open third country markets, I would like to thank the Parliament for its support, and we really need to accelerate our effort to reach an agreement of an international procurement instrument just say to Mr. Grödler that the first proposal from the Commission was sent in 2012. It makes 9 years of discussion on the IPI, and it should also be considered as a priority to provide an adequate level of protection against unfair competition within the European market. But we're a bit confident because our Portuguese friends are really managing this file quite well in the Council. And in this respect, we also place great hope in the future Commission proposal for an ambitious instrument on foreign subsidy. I would like to thank again all our speakers for their kind availability and collaboration, and to all of you who joined us today for this session. And I'm glad to invite you to attend our next webinar, which is in the framework of the European Year of Rail, which will be on skills for the rail supply industry, adapting, training and attracting talent, which will take place on the 24th of March. Thank you all, take care and stay healthy, and have a nice day, and thank you again for being here. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Grödler. Je crois que ça a été la course-poursuite pour être là. Merci beaucoup. Hein.
Thank you very much, everybody. Very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thanks.
Thanks.